Well, this is my second time seeing this musical, so I guess I've been there just for 2 days. It doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it? After a very successful off-West End season at the Old Vic last year, Just for One Day has transferred into the West End, now playing at the Shaftesbury Theatre. Now, I was a little bit mixed when I saw this musical last time. I enjoyed a lot of its elements and ideas, but I had a few hang-ups here and there. Some hang-ups that admittedly I did struggle to summarize and justify, because I was struggling with the fact that I did enjoy a lot of what this musical was presenting, but my hang-ups were stopping me from really truly loving it. Now that I've seen it again, I'll say for the first thing is that I've come out this musical a little bit more positive this time. But still a lot of those little hang-ups remain, and some changes have been made, so do I think the Live Aid musical has improved? Has it made itself stronger coming to the West End, or have more hang-ups arrived? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie, I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do versus brackets, game shows, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. But let's dive into the Live Aid musical. As I've kind of alluded to in that opening spiel, I am a little bit more positive on the Live Aid musical. I think for what it's trying to be and the story that it wants to tell, I do think it's successful in that way. At the end of the day, this musical kind of has to be big nostalgia Live Aid show. That's the audience they want to bring in, that's the story that they want to tell, and I think when we're looking at it, we can judge it for the story it could be, but really the most weight should be on what it does present. And I think if I'm looking at this, obviously I am on a slightly outside perspective because, you know, I was not born in the 80s, surprise, surprise. But I think Live Aid is an event that transcends a lot of different generations, and even this musical does address that and gives characters within it who weren't born at Live Aid. It covers this generational gap and how the memories of that event are passed on between generations. And I think music as a whole has transcended that generation anyway. I think the 80s nostalgia has been seen massively for the past decade. I mean, think of things like Stranger Things and how massive that was. And I think for me personally, you know, I grew up listening to Freddie Mercury in the car because that's what a lot of my family were into. That's the music of my family's generation. So that's just been naturally passed down to me. So, you know, I am inclined to enjoy a lot of this just from the get-go. I'm a huge fan of Bowie. I'm a huge fan of Queen. I named those two because take one look at me. You can very obviously tell. I said that, you know? But how does the Live Aid musical go about tackling its story? It decides to tell this story mainly from the perspective of Bob Geldof. Geldof, one of the singers from the Rat Pack, that's not the name. The Boomtown Rats, that's the name. The Rat Pack was the f***ing, oh god. Maybe I'm not a Live Aid fan. Maybe it didn't get passed down from generations. God. But let's explore how this musical tackles telling the story of Live Aid. Very naturally, it takes the perspective a lot of the time of Bob Geldof. Geldof himself was very key to the creation of the show. He was a big collaborator, did an opening night speech that lasted for like 12 minutes. Iconic. Started calling out Elon Musk and Trump and like real world events and how the fight with Live Aid links to all of that, which I really do. I respect the man a lot for that. Man is not afraid to speak his mind, and a lot of the musical does explore how much that man is not afraid to speak his mind. And I think on the whole, Geldof is a really interesting perspective to come into this musical for. Obviously, he was the figurehead. He was the person pushing for Band Aid. He's the person who pushed for Live Aid. He was deeply emotionally affected by the images coming out of Ethiopia at that point. The truly horrific things that were happening in that country, and just trying to find the little things he could do, starting by just collecting money from people who came into his house and realizing that would never even make the slightest, tiniest dent, so trying to make it bigger and bigger and bigger till it kind of becomes too big for him to handle. But I also do really appreciate how this musical isn't afraid to criticize. This musical isn't afraid to sweep past some of the criticism that have been levied to Live Aid in the past. Band Aid and Live Aid did do a lot of great things, but at the end of the day, they were Band-Aid fixes. That was the whole idea of the name in the first place. It was to do something to help, and that doesn't actually address the underlying issues that were going on in Ethiopia at the time. The dictatorship and all of these outside influences, meaning that even if they could get the funding, even though they could send all this food there, it wouldn't actually make it into the towns to feed the starving children. There's the way that the West views Africa in the way that we do now because of things like Live Aid, the way that we group that as one place when it's loads of different countries on one continent. There's obviously the hero worshipping and the white savior complex that can be attached to certain things like this. And I think that it's a lot to tackle. It's a hell of a lot to tackle. There is so much that you can levy towards Live Aid as a movement and as an idea and as a fundraiser that it can be criticized for. And I'm glad that the musical doesn't shy away from doing that completely. A lot of that comes from the character of Amara. She is someone who is working in Ethiopia at the time. She is seeing the devastation and the horrific things that are happening in that country. And also the way that Gough himself handles it, trying to push aside the idea of hero worshipping, trying to downplay a lot of what that movement did. Proving that this wasn't the be-all and end-all and the full stop and everything, and these ideas and the help and the empathy that we need to have as a society keeps on building and building and building and growing as new issues and new problems rise up. And actually getting to the underlying issue underneath. I feel like the first time I watched it, I wasn't entirely set that the musical had addressed these, but watching it again, I do think it does what it can. Is it perfect? I don't think so. But at the end of the day, the Live Aid musical is trying to be that. It's trying to be a celebration of the feeling of being at Live Aid, the feeling of being at that event, the good that it did manage to do in places, while also addressing some of the negative side of it. It's a very hard balance to strike, and I don't want to damn it for maybe not in every single place striking the right balance. I can understand that, that is not the priority of this musical, but I'm glad that it doesn't forget it. The last time I spoke about this musical, I spoke about some of the come from away vibes that I got from this show, and I do think that actually, this time it feels a little bit less evident. They've reworked a little bit the show to change the perspective that we're coming in from, and also they've kind of blurred a lot of that ensemble back into the background. When it was at the Old Vic, all of these characters that we saw popping up and singing a lot of the music, a lot of the ensemble, had direct names. These names flashed onto the back wall. We saw them, they were named, they were specific. And they've removed a lot of that now, and we only get names for the few characters we follow. On the one hand, I do enjoy this because I think it allows us to more focus on these figureheads. So we've kind of come away a little bit from that idea of this whole group feeling of everyone being there and being named and very specific, to more so focusing on these individual figures. You've got Gough, you've got the mother and daughter, you've got the producers and the sound designers behind the scenes, and Maggie Thatcher, because why not? I think this slight shift in framing device does work because it gives more focus onto these specific people, and I don't think the other characters, the other named characters in the ensemble, ever really had enough given to them that it felt like it was truly like a Come From Away, where we're learning about all these different perspectives of people on the day. I feel like it's slightly more honed now into that behind-the-scenes perspective, which is probably the more interesting perspective to focus on, if we're being honest. We still do get the more grounded approach to telling the story from the crowd, from Suzanne. The biggest change that I noticed from watching this when it comes to the plot and the framing device of the whole show is a subtle shift in the storytelling between the mother and daughter here. Suzanne is someone who was at Live Aid. She was obsessed with the music, she met her first real boyfriend there, and now, 40 years later, she is telling her daughter, who's about to go to university, about Live Aid. At the Old Vic, I remember this being the daughter asking about Live Aid. She was going up to her mother and asking about it specifically, but here it's kind of flipped, so that the daughter is less interested in Live Aid, but is going to university to study history, so she is going, and specifically going to be studying stuff like Live Aid, which is weird. Are there university courses at the moment that study specifically 80s history? I don't know. I mean, you can study a lot of things at university, so maybe there is, but I don't know. I still don't love the framing devices of the university thing and the project and whatever, but whatever. So it's interesting because we have two different ideas here. The daughter wanting to learn more, and the daughter kind of having Live Aid thrust upon her, basically. I do think if I'm holding both of these up, they both do work, and they both lead us into the story well enough. But I do think I prefer the daughter being the inquisitive one. But maybe that's me coming in from my perspective. You know, that is the generation that I am a part of. I am young. You know, I was born like 17, 18 years after Live Aid, however long it was. I don't know. I can't math. So naturally, in this type of story, I'm going to more gravitate towards that perspective because that's where I come from. I don't have the nostalgia that is intrinsically linked to that, but I have seen about Live Aid, I've learned about Live Aid, I want to learn more about Live Aid. Hell, that is something I do actually genuinely quite enjoy about this musical, learning more about how it came about and how they put it together and the very short amount of time frames that they managed to do it in, and the very impressive feats that they achieved technologically within that. So I think lessening her voice a bit is a bit of a shame, but I do also think it manages to allow her to criticize it a bit more as well. I think that it was evident beforehand, but some more of those things I mentioned previously about common criticisms towards Live Aid get to be addressed in these moments. And I do enjoy that balance of these different perspectives, the positive and the negative, and the things that are more black and white and in between. As things often are in a modern society, things are complex. Things can be good and bad at the same time. Impacts may be overall positive, but may have underlying negatives to them. But on the whole, I'm not too mad about the change, because I do think it still does work. A lot of the flashbacks we get of Suzanne are basically the same as well, flashing back to her as a teenager, when she's trying to raise money for Band-Aid, when she's selling the album, her first meeting with Geldof. These three, as kind of our through-line protagonists, really just work to give us this shift in perspective, to give us a little bit behind the scenes, and also give us a little bit of the other side of it, and the impact on everyday people of Live Aid. So when we're looking at it more as a whole, instead of focusing on like individual characters, it is quite successful in how it tackles it, pacing-wise. Act 1 focuses on the inception. It introduces us to Geldof and the figures, and basically focuses on Band-Aid. And then Act 2 shifts and more so focuses on the actual live event. For the most part, I think it is paced very well, but I find that the second we go into the Live Aid event, the pacing kind of struggles to balance the behind the scenes with the performance a little bit. It's hard to say because obviously it's Live Aid, you want to have the performances there, but I don't think they thread these in between as well as they do throughout the rest of the musical, because the songs kind of have their own moments here and become more complete instead of having these sections where we're going between the story, like how you would expect in a musical as they do it in the first act. I feel like you're kind of just sitting through long song, little bit of behind the scenes, long song, little bit of behind the scenes. And these songs aren't bad. It's good. It's great. I love these songs. But when I'm thinking about the overall picture of a musical and how it's structured, I do think it's a little bit flawed in this way. I'll speak a little bit later as well about how the music is integrated when I speak about the music as a whole, but you know, that's just something that I definitely noticed this time around, was that structure and that pace, especially when we get to the second half of Act 2. Like, even leading up straight to the ending. I think that's the section that could have really used with some restructuring. And honestly, as much as I enjoy Let It Be as the finale, matching the actual Live Aid experience, I do wonder if My Generation would have been a stronger way to end that show. Because the whole concept of this musical, and a lot of what Geldof wanted to speak about when doing a Live Aid musical is about the future. Not letting Live Aid be the full stop. Looking at issues that we are facing now and seeing how a new generation can tackle them. Maybe we can do something like Live Aid. Maybe we can address some of the things that Live Aid didn't necessarily address. Maybe we'll tackle it in our own ways, but moving on with that. I think the whole concept of the musical is kind of all about that. We start the whole show with it being learning about Live Aid and learning about this from the daughter's perspective. So I feel like it kind of doesn't feel as satisfying with that not being the final note. But again, I can understand it from the other side of it as well, where Let It Be is a great finale song. It feels like a culmination. It was the culmination of Live Aid as well. You get that moment where the mic cuts out. But I just feel like it would be slightly more narratively satisfying to end with the actual call to arms, rather than kind of shoving that in randomly before it's quite over. And the final thing I want to touch on just before I wrap up talking about the story and how they approach telling this is the no imitation aspect that they embed in. We're not getting impressions here. We're not getting the ensemble playing Freddie Mercury or Bowie. We're not getting Bob Dylan or like the actual artists. We're getting more of the ensemble bringing their own flair to it. The impressions are more saved for the more central figures. Your Geldofs, your Maggie Thatchers randomly. Yes, she's in here too. Even like casting-wise, they're not trying to be quite one-to-one with things, which I do appreciate. It's allowing a new generation to tell the story of Live Aid, which links quite nicely back into that central storyline of the mother telling the daughter about the event. That's something I really do appreciate with the approach, especially in the direction and the setup of this whole show. Because these figures are so iconic. No one's going to be able to match these iconic performances. So to go in a slightly different direction actually does very much work, especially when these figures are more so name-dropped rather than being the central focus of the musical. As you can kind of see from my ramble and rant, it's a lot of little things about Just for One Day that irk me. I don't think any of my hang-ups or my criticisms ruin Just for One Day, and that's the main thing I want to say as I culminate this little section of the review. Because on the whole, I think it is a strong jukebox musical. I think it manages to tell the story well. I think it has an interesting way of approaching telling the story. I think it's fun. I think it's nostalgic. I think if you are a fan of Live Aid, you are going to get a lot out of it. And I don't think it shies away from a lot of the criticisms of it, a lot of the things that it didn't quite achieve, the things that didn't quite go right, and the overall impact that it had. But even with those hang-ups, I do think that this is a strong musical. I do think it manages to tell it well. I do think it's fun. I think it's easy to follow, despite some things that I think it could tighten up in places. But let's speak a little bit about the music. The music of Live Aid is intrinsic to it. You can't do a Live Aid musical without having the acts from Live Aid. And I think for the most part, how they approach doing it works. I don't think they're the strongest placed songs ever in a jukebox musical. I think the strongest times when they do it is actually when the song really matches the emotion that the moment is going for. I think a moment like Drive, they pair the song Drive with the moment where Geldof is watching the broadcast from Ethiopia from the first time. He is watching the images, these horrific things happening in Ethiopia, and speaking between these lyrics about what he's seeing and how deeply it affects him and moves him, and empathy that he feels towards these scenes of people struggling, dying, starving, these things that sometimes we don't necessarily fully comprehend just how terrifying they are. The injustice. I feel like a song like Drive really matches that emotion well. A similar moment is I Don't Like Mondays. I think out of a lot of the acts that we get from Live Aid, this is the one that works the most because we have Geldof's perspective running through it, which we don't have with a lot of the other ones. Geldof is worried about performing. He's obviously not the biggest star out of that lineup, but he gets to have that moment on the stage. He gets to feel that energy from that crowd, and doing that and having his little bits of narration running through that song really helped to carry the emotion of that moment. And a similar point where I think it does work really well is We Are the Champions. Obviously, incredible song. One of my favourite Queen songs of all time, which is just this absolute anthem of celebration and triumph. And they pair that really well with the selling of Do They Know It's Christmas Time at All? This climb to the top of the charts, this battle between it and Last Christmas, the way they're trying to push it into the charts to try and raise as much money as they possibly can. And they do really well to show the ground perspectives of this, how different people do their bit to buy the album, to raise the money, to sell more copies of it, to raise the money. And it does result in this really triumphant moment that actually does catch you kind of off guard. It manages to hit you right here. That's where I think Just One Day is very, very successful. But I don't think every song manages to place itself as well as those ones and those specific examples. Actually, let's take another Queen song, Radio Gaga. Radio Gaga is played at the moment where they are trying to get the song on the radio. I can see the link. Is it the best link of all time? No. Some of them do feel like they're a little bit more haphazardly placed and they don't necessarily always suit the emotions. And, you know, I think it's a shame because you do have these really great moments, but they really work and they're really punchy. And then you have some of the other ones where it's like, okay, yeah. And they don't stick out in your mind as well. An idea that they go with a lot of the time, which I actually do really appreciate, is during the performances during Live Aid, where they do a lot of medleys. They'll take songs from the London concert and songs from the Philly concert and blend them together. And that's a really cool idea. Showing these different moments happening at the same time, the blend between these two events. I think it's a really fun way to show their impact and to show the scale that they're working at. I think other jukebox musicals have done certain mashups a little bit stronger. I mean, Moulin Rouge is like the pinnacle of a musical jukebox mashup. But I still like the creative decision behind that. And I think at the end of the day, even if these songs aren't always placed incredibly well, this is some of the best music of all time. This is the music I grew up listening to because of my family. This is music that transcends generations. And I think the musical as a whole manages to go between these very conflicting styles incredibly well. When it comes to the set and design of this musical, it's fairly simple. We have this stretched screen almost, this box at the back that has a lot of different projection and screens going across the back, with this stadium tiered seating that the ensemble sit on, leading up towards the back where the band are placed. Obviously trying to give that feeling of a concert, of a stadium, of this big spectacle, and I do think it works. The video design is great, and that's where a lot of the meat actually comes in to bring us into the atmosphere. It does a really great job actually of mixing a lot of live film to archive footage and photos and memories and little treasure troves of the history of this event. I think that's the most impactful stuff that they use. Sometimes they will just put the artist's name on the back of the screen, and that kind of feels a little bit unnecessary in places. It almost feels a little bit redundant and a bit like they don't trust their audience to know the artist singing the songs. Almost compensating a little bit in the design for the idea of taking the artist a little bit away from their music in how the ensemble actually play it and perform it. But yeah, I'm a little bit mixed on that, but that's a very tiny little detail. Where it does succeed, like completely and utterly, is the lighting and the sound design. I think the lighting is incredible. I love these rows of lights that line the proscenium, and also now at this version, line again towards the box into the auditorium, bringing those lights out, these warm orange glows. I love that massive curtain of lights that starts on stage. It's the pre-show curtain and comes down again a little bit later into the show. when we're starting to get into the event itself. It's very cool and atmospheric, and I think the sound design in this space is incredible. I think it really makes you feel like you are in a concert. It's loud, it's bursting, it's electric. And that's the feeling that this musical really needed to replicate, that feeling of being there. The crowd, the music, and that soaring energy of that rock and the punchiness of it. And I think they're very successful in that. Finally, let's speak about this cast. I want to say, on the whole, this is an incredible ensemble. The entire cast brings so much dedication to bringing this show to life and give a great tribute to all of these artists' amazing, amazing work. These are difficult songs to do. These are difficult songs to even manage to match the quality of the originals, and I do think that this entire cast managed to do it. Often thanks to the approach that they've taken, doing it in their own personal ways. I want to highlight 3 specific people in that ensemble that I really, really loved, and that's James Hamid, who gets so many great moments in that show, but one of my favourites is In the Air Tonight. This moment, this dreamlike sequence just before Live Aid hits. Some powerful vocals there from Hamid. We get Eloise Davies, who has so many fantastic vocal moments throughout that entire show. I can't even highlight 1 or 2. They're one of the ensemble members I noticed the most on that stage. They get such an amazing track. That, if I could sing, that's the track I want to play. And finally, Freddie Love. Freddie Love gets given Bohemian Rhapsody. Probably, when we're speaking about difficult songs, that is one of the most difficult songs to do, especially performing it the majority of the time as a solo. And the energy that Freddie has on that stage, the charisma and the stage presence they carry with their confidence, it is incredible. They are a captivating performer. Incredible work. While I highlight those 3 specifically, that's not to undersell the amazing work from the rest of that ensemble as well. Phenomenal work across the board. Let's start from the top, speaking about Craig Ells. Craig Ells is probably the closest to an imitation that we get from this show, but I think it's just because he's so good at portraying Geldof. He gets the mannerisms, he understands the tone of voice and how Geldof holds himself as a figure. He has a real energy, a real fire behind him playing Geldof, and a real humanity as well, the ups and the downs of this journey. It's a fantastic portrayal, and I'm so glad he stayed on from the Old Vic. We have Melissa Jacks, who has taken over the role of Suzanne. A really sweet and caring figure in this whole thing. That motherly dynamic that she has with her daughter is really well earned and really well explored. I think a huge success of Jack's portrayal is showing these moments of how much this event really meant to her. We see how much she pushed and pushed and pushed, also thanks to the incredible portrayal of her younger self as well, from Hope Kenner. These two share that character journey incredibly well. Faith Phil takes on the role of Gemma. I do think this version kind of gives her a little bit less of a voice than the Old Vic version, but I still think Faith's portrayal is incredibly strong. She absolutely kills My Generation, starting there. Let's start right from there. The energy and the power that she has in that song, oh, it's fantastic to watch. It's so engaging. And as a perspective that I'm more coming into this musical for, she's a very relatable character as well, and I think a lot of that is down to Faith's performance. Rhiannon Louise Mikulski plays Amara, someone who is very critical of Live Aid and is not afraid to speak up and speak out, specifically to Geldof himself. There's a lot of real weight to the language that the character of Amara uses to really highlight the horror that was happening in Ethiopia at the time. The extent of what this famine was doing, and the approach to that language, the slow pace of that dialogue, digging it in more and more and more, makes it even more visceral. We don't see any images of these moments like they showed at Live Aid, but it's completely sold to us through the writing and through the portrayals of these characters, like Rhiannon Louise Mikulski does with Amara. We get some incredible supporting performances from Jack Michael Stacey as Tim, a great pairing up with Hope Kenner's young Suzanne. He's really sweet. He's really sweet. That's like my main takeaway from his performance. And I think the pair of them really do sell this young kind of puppy love relationship. The nervousness and the shyness and they're not quite addressing the obvious connection between them. Kelly Abuwu, oh my god, I love Kelly so much. Kelly is so good in every role she plays. But here as Marsha, she shines. There's one moment where she gets to really push it and really call out Geldof on his shit, and that is one of the best moments in the entire show. Completely and utterly sold on Kelly's portrayal of it. She commands the stage in that moment. We also get some other figures backstage as well, like Ashley Samuels, who plays Jim. Quite a down-to-earth perspective when we're getting into the behind-the-scenes stuff. We also get Tim Mahedran as Harvey Goldsmith. This was a role I didn't quite understand massively in the Old Vic production, but I think I now get what he's kind of going for. He acts as a foil to Geldof. Geldof was not afraid to be very standoffish, whereas Harvey was a little bit more to the book. So they're very conflicting personality-wise. And I think Els and Mahedran really bounce off each other incredibly well. They sell the comedy in these moments. Tim is a performer who has such a fantastic comedic timing. Even when he's playing a little bit more of the straight man in the relationship, he understands the timing of it perfectly. Speaking of great comedic performances, Julie Atherton as Maggie Thatcher. If you can take a figure as hated as Maggie Thatcher, rightfully so, let's be perfectly well and truly honest, I'd turn her into one of the funniest characters in this show because of the way that this show pokes fun at her. I think that is a mark of a great performance, and Julie Atherton sells it amazingly. And finally, we have George Yore playing Midge Yore. There is no relation. Whoever came up with doing this, I love you so much. This is so funny. One of the first figures that Geldof kind of ropes into this and kind of Act 1's straight man in a way. I love the dynamic that those two form together as actors. This is a fantastic ensemble. I feel like I don't have enough time to really dive into exactly what they do and all of their little intricacies and the performances and the vocals. All of them really do get their moment because of how the show is structured. Yeah, this is such a great cast. Despite hang-ups, I do quite enjoy this for one day. There's things that I don't want to hold too strongly against it because it's clearly not what the show is going for. It's clearly aiming for an audience that is more in line with that nostalgia and with that feeling of being there. But it balances a lot of these different ideas of activism and pushing for new things and how generations will try and make mistakes and fail, but push through trying to do the right thing. If you're a huge Live Aid fan, I could see you really, really enjoying this musical. I think if you're more critical on Live Aid, there is stuff for you here, but I do think the main crux for this musical is that nostalgia. And with that fantastic ensemble and the iconic music throughout, I'm glad I got to see this for another day. But what do you think? Have you seen the Live Aid musical, either at the Old Vic? Did you see it in Toronto? It went to Toronto. I didn't even address that in this review. It went to Toronto. Or now in the West End? What's your thoughts? Let me know all of them in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on screen right now and a link to my Instagram if you'd like to drop me a follow over there. I also have our social links and a merch store in the description down below. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.